Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Copper Club podcast, your home of South American football. And Happy New Year. We are finally back after a well-deserved break. And I'm joined by a previous co-host to go through today's show. I'm delighted that Nathalia Tavares is here to talk about some young talents in Brazil and the usual chaos before the season starts. But Nathalia, welcome back to the show. How are we doing?
Thank you for having me back. I'm very, very happy to be in this episode again and to talk about Brazilian football, South American football in general. I'm a little bit, rested because of the holidays and everything, but the Brazilian season is always a chaos, and the European season is also chaos, especially in the Premier League. So, yeah, it's just good to come back and right now in this episode come and talk about Brazil because the season hasn't started yet, but it's about to, and there's a lot of links to Europe and a lot of crazy stuff happening around here. So yeah, we never actually have a break, us Brazilians and football lovers, but yeah, it's just good because we have a lot to talk about every
Yeah,
time.
absolutely. Look, I can talk from an English and a European point of view. We moan about the fixture congestion, but we were talking just before we started recording this particular podcast that the Copa do Brazil final was less than 2 weeks ago, and then the new season has been brought forward, and that's kicking off in a few weeks, and then the state cups actually begin this weekend. So, yeah, I'm not sure how you even find a chance to have a rest, Natalia, because it's just constant stream of fixtures, but it's also the January transfer window. So we'll dive into a couple of players very soon. But because I have Natalia on the show, it only makes sense to talk about Flamengo, and we'll just highlight their success last season, obviously winning the league and the Copa Libertadores. Natalia, obviously you are there week in, week out. You're seeing it. You've got a front row seat to the success that Felipe Luis was developing. And for now, he will be staying at the club. But let's talk about the positives and just tell me how good Flamengo were last season and did they deserve to win the two titles?
Yeah, of course. I feel like if you look at numbers, Flamengo's dominance is undisputed, and it shows why they won the Libertadores and the Copa do Brasil was in 2024, but the Brasileirão as well. So it just shows the dominance and, not only translated in numbers, but in performances as well. And in the Copa Libertadores final, for example, Palmeiras didn't shoot on goal. So that's kind of major, to not let Palmeiras, but mostly Vitor Roque and Flaco Lopez, who were on a super hot run at that point, to not even shoot on goal. So that says a lot. And a lot is due to Felipe Luis as well. Obviously, there was a change in Flamengo's management in terms of board of directors, president of the club, and everything. And the premise of those changes were we're going to make football professional, which for a while it hadn't been. And it already showed in their first year in charge as well. And obviously, having Felipe Luis, who was someone who knows the club from top down. He was a player here before. He was a Flamengo fan before all that as well. So he knows the club. He loves the club. So that obviously helped. But he's also a manager or coach, whatever you say. I feel like he's more of a manager than a pure head coach. But he's got his ideas, and as much as he's willing to die for them, he's also humble enough to say, oh, I can change this because this player works well in this other place, in this other, doing this other function or whatever. He's able to, change his tactics and, change his ideas, keeping his core principles, of course, because I feel like every manager has that, but he can change some of his principles to make things work. And we kind of were able to see it through 2025 because it was very, questioned at some point at the start of the season, like, oh, you have this great squad. How is it not working that well? Because it's also, I don't know if you guys have this perception over there, but here in Brazil, it's like Flamengo always has to give a show to its fans, to everyone. So you don't have to win. You have to win and, win beautifully, as we say here, with flair, with lots of goals being scored and those defensive moments that get everybody, wow. But that's not what happens every time. But throughout the season, we kind of started that seeing that happen, and towards the end, we got that 8-0 win against Vitória at the Maracanã, which was like, whoa. So yeah, we saw that team growing, especially because of the signings that came in the middle of the season. Jorginho, of course, came undisputed in that team and managed to be fit mostly. Saul as well, when he had to play, he played well. Samuel Lino, who was very, why is he here? He's not doing well, but then eventually went to score the goal that guaranteed the Brazilian title. So the expectations for 2026 are the best possible, especially because Felipe Luis is staying.
And as you said there, 8-0 against Victoria. I think it was 6-0 early in the season against Juventud, if I'm correct. Some big score lines there, but only to concede 8 goals in 19 home games is incredible. Look, Felipe Luis is a defender first and foremost, and he's automatically introduced that knowledge into the back line. And I think it's important to probably point out that he's played with some of the players within that squad still, because it's not that long since he's been retired. And I think it's worth highlighting that, because now he's getting so much praise from even European audience. Chelsea were obviously talking with him. Apparently, I've only just seen that before jumping on, so I'm not sure how true that is, but there's no smoke without fire that there's a lot of interest. So whether he stays with Flamengo for the whole year, I think will dictate potentially success. But away from Luis, the question I want to ask before we start diving into the players is not Fluminense, Flamengo, Palmeiras, maybe Cruzeiro. Like, it's going to be an interesting title race, and I know it's very, very early, but let's have some early predictions from you, Nat, in terms of, do you think Palmeiras can fight with Flamengo again, and do you think that it will be those 2 or 3 teams, or because there seems to be a growing gap even within the league at the moment? I know you're a Flamengo fan, but if you could put that to one side for a second, are you a little bit concerned as to how that's now being split into those 2 or 3 teams potentially pulling away?
Yeah, we've been proven over and over what Palmeiras under Abel Ferreira can do. I feel like if it wasn't for that run that Abel was like, we're gonna win every game, made those changes with Alan coming in and becoming a bigger part of the squad and everything, probably the title of the league and maybe the Copa Libertadores run would have been different, and the title in the league would have been decided much earlier than the 37th round, I think. It was like up until the end almost. So I feel like it's just gonna get hotter and hotter because, they are looking at Flamengo, who's obviously, being well run for a while now, but now in another step, as I said, because the football directors and everything, they are now professionals. We have José Boto here, who was, I feel like, a scout, and then he was a footballing director for some clubs in Europe, and now he's here. He's doing a great job as well, running those, talks with agents to bring players in. And I feel like a lot of clubs, especially Palmeiras and Cruzeiro, who have managed to do stuff and changes in their board, in their finances, to, restructure themselves in that way as well. They're trying to copy that model, not necessarily by bringing people from Europe and everything, but, trying to establish a structure in football inside the club and to build a culture that says, okay, we're serious. We're not going back to the early 2000s where it was all a mess, but it was fun, but it was all a mess. And essentially we need to, as much as it was fun and it lasted, we need to go from there to some point where we are sustainable, especially because we have SAFs here, which are basically, what we get with City and Chelsea being owned by, other, by groups and people, whatever. Yeah. So we have it here and we call it SAFs. And those SAFs are injecting a lot of money in most clubs when they buy those clubs, but not necessarily making those changes to be, professional, to be structured professionally. And Cruzeiro paid the price for that. For a while, they were a SAF and they did okay because they were relegated and it couldn't get worse than that. But, it took them a while to figure out, we just don't need only money. we need a structure that's going to take us to the next level. And in 2025, that's what they started doing, and it's already paying its price. So I feel like those three are in a much, much better position to, make that top three and, distance themselves and still make the championship, the league fun, because, when it's only a team league, it's, not nice, not good for us who watch, and for, for selling the league abroad, it wouldn't be fun. So I know it's only 3 out of 20, but it's good to see, that this is happening. And I'd like also to mention Mirasol, who did a fantastic job, and now they're going to have a crazier calendar to deal with. But the thing is, they've restructured that club with the transfer money from Luis Araújo, who is now at Flamengo. And because he was sold a few times, he was developed there. They are his developing club, that FIFA solidarity mechanism. So he was there for a while before moving to São Paulo. And all those transfers since then kind of got them a great amount of money for the club they are, relatively to the club they are. And they managed to, change their structure, and not only personnel, but also the club's training center and the stadium as well. So it's very nice to see, and it shows that you don't need to be a big club to restructure yourself. You can do it being a modest club. And, well, I'm excited to see what they can do as well. I don't feel like they're going to repeat what they did in 2025, but I feel it's just one more of those clubs that are going to be mid-table and possibly top, who knows. But they're going to create some problems for Flamengo, Palmeiras, Cruzeiro, even Botafogo, who knows.
Yeah, which is really interesting. And if you want to learn a little bit more about Mirasol, we've wrote a piece which is on our Substack, so you can sign up for free and find out their story there. But Mirasol are a side that were in the top 4, top 6 for a long time, and a club that have got so many things right off the pitch. They would have been planning for next season with the finances which were secured with the Libertadores, etc. So I agree with you. It may be a challenge for them to compete that high in the league again, but a run in the Libertadores, a run in the cup competition brings more income, and I think they're a clever club that have prepared for that. Now, definitely one to keep an eye on. And like I said, if you like any written content like that, do subscribe to our Substack. And I know we're going to talk about some transfers today, moving towards European teams, but a trend that I've noticed here, and just to touch on really, is the fact the amount of Brazilian players wanting to stay in the league and the amount of quality European players moving to Brazil over the last 2 years has sometimes dried up this podcast, because we speak about players moving across to Europe, but players are recognizing that Ancelotti may well pick them for the national team, or they can flourish and get the minutes they required in Brazil. Obviously, the main name is to pull out is Memphis Depay, but as you've already said, Nathalia, in terms of Jorginho, for example, like, yes, maybe towards the latter years, but not to go to Saudi or not to go to the Liga, etc., and come to Brazil and play a big part for a team that demands a lot. You can't come to Brazil and just retire. There are expectations. And the fact that that's growing the league is great to see. So the fact that transfers are dwindling down a little bit, I see it as a huge success for Brazilian football and the league as well. But there are obviously names that are moving to Europe, and we're going to dive into a couple now. One has already moved. We haven't spoken about him yet on the podcast, so it makes sense to, but we'll park him for now. I'm going to start with Santos, where everyone was talking about Neymar and his glorious comeback and how it almost ended up in a disaster, and then it ended up being its own little fairy tale. However, the media tried to narrate the story there. But it's not Neymar we're going to talk about, and it's not Santos that we are going to dive into. It's their left back, Souza, 19 years old, who is being, well, I've lost count with the amount of teams who are interested in this particular player. So instead of analysing where he's going to potentially fit in Europe, let's actually just dive into his player profile, because maybe someone who's gone a little bit under the radar, because here on the Copper Club, regular listeners know we love a left back. We've been talking about Cruzeiro's Kaique. We've been speaking about Bahia's Luciano Juba, who's broke into the Brazilian team. But we haven't spoken about Souza. Maybe we should have done, because this tall, athletic 19-year-old Doesn't maybe have the best stats, but again, watching him play compared to his output is very different. And we need to remember wherever he goes, and people who are listening to this particular podcast, is that he played over 20 games for Santos, chipped in with a goal and a couple of assists. But this was a team, yes, they had Neymar, but this was a team that had just been promoted from Serie B, and they were almost expected to be in this relegation battle. It's only because they signed Neymar that everyone outside of Brazil anyway thought that Santos were going to go and achieve great things. It wasn't to be. They stayed up on the last day of the season and managed to secure their status. And like I said, Neymar got his day in the sun. But Souza, 19-year-old left back, loads of qualities here, a few weaknesses, but I'm keen to hear your thoughts, Nathalia, on this 19-year-old and whether you think that he would be a good fit in Europe at any point.
Yeah, I had the opportunity to watch him live actually here at the Maracanã against Flamengo, and I felt like he was very balanced. He's a very balanced fullback, and I feel like that's important in Europe, especially because of the physical demands in defense and the way more and more teams need their fullbacks to support at least attack. So he does those things very well. As you said, maybe the stats don't really show, but it's all about how he helps the team. And I feel like he's grown to be an important part of Santos, who had a shaky season, but he was there and he managed to stay there in the team, which was important for him. You know, the Serie A, the experienced players get there. It goes underrated sometimes for most people, but I feel like it's very important. It's not like intensity and physicality the same level of the Premier League, for example, but it's very physical. It's very intense, especially if you compare with other leagues here in South America, which is Brazil's reality, even though it seems more and more like we're closer to other leagues than the ones in our continent, as we see the dominance in the Libertadores. But hopefully this changes because I want some fun. But the thing is, Souza is someone that I feel like can have success in Europe. I feel like he's not going to arrive to any club there and just be a regular starter. For, you know, just him arriving there, he's not going to be the starter, but he could manage to get a starting spot in no time. Different to Wesley, maybe, who made the move, who's also a fullback, but he was a request from Gasperini, so there was a plan there for him to start. But unless it's a situation like this, I can see Souza. I don't see Souza starting, but I see him as someone that brings more solid. I totally forgot the word now, but you know, he makes the defense more solid. He makes the team more solid as the way he moves. He knows how to, you know, operate in width and also, you know, run across the left flank or even in the central flank if needed. He's shown to be able to do that, to play more inside or outside depending on what the team needs. And he also has a shooting, you know, he has shooting abilities in his pockets as well. So that's very good to see, especially because, you know, as I said, more and more players who play as wingers, wingbacks, or fullbacks are demanded to be in attack or even crash the box. He's someone who is very comfortable doing that. So I just feel like he's got a great profile for Europe, but, you know, patience. Don't put your expectations in a place where if he makes a mistake, it's going to be like, oh, he's awful. No, he's not awful. But he needs time still. And I feel like he can totally get that in a club where it's well run, you know, and has some stability.
I think patience should be the Copper Club's motto. I think we mention it every single time, but it's only because we know how awful the media can be and how people can just see. I saw some hate towards Iger Jesus the other day for Forest just because of maybe being isolated, and it's not playing to their strengths. And I think that's really important to recognise. Instead of just signing these players and trying to fit them into a hole that you need to be thinking about these players' attributes and how they can benefit you and whether that is the right transfer. I think it's really important to mention with Souza, and what I really like in terms of if a team's looking for a right fit now is his ability to hug the touchline. If Santos are, well, rarely last season, but when they were dominating particular matches and had teams penned back, he was excellent at hugging the touchline, but not just staying out of the game. Okay, sometimes we just see left backs take the ball, pass it back to the centre back, and that's their job done. He was really happy to push wide, waiting for his opportunity. And he's so tall and athletic, like his legs, like the span of his legs when he gets going. I think this is why he is a really comfortable dribbler. It's because it's hard for defenders to get away from him. So I think even I was surprised when I was going through his stats that his output of 3 goal contributions in 25 matches isn't particularly great. But if you actually go back through some of these games, the finishing on the other end of it wasn't always particularly great. So the fact that he can hug the touchline and bound up the pitch is really promising if you want to break into European football. But as you said there, he's also capable of coming inside if he needs to. He's got a sharp turn of pace. He knows how to sort of wrong side a fullback because he is a fullback himself. So the way in which he can cut inside, his dribbling ability works both ends. Yes, his output will need to be improved. It's not just because he is in a poor side, but he's only 19. He's only learning his craft still. And his decision making sometimes he's not the best. Maybe a lack of options inside the box, playing for a side who are almost relegated. I know we keep banging on that drum, but if he was playing for someone like Flamengo, Botafogo, etc., those stats would have been a lot more impressive, and maybe teams would have been looking at Souza over, say, Cuiabano. It's one of those. So I do really like him. I think he's really raw. But the fact that he's played for and represented Brazil at under 17 level in the World Cup just goes to show that there's already that ounce of experience there. And Nat, you touched on, like, yes, Brazil isn't as physical as the Premier League, but the question I get all the time is, oh, well, can the young Brazilians come across and deal with it? And like, I don't think the gap is as big as what it once was or what a European audience thinks it is. So, especially when it comes to a tall, athletic player like Souza, I think he can show like he can easily fit into the European football in time. And that's the same message as to what you've just said. Patience, time, depends on the fit of the team and what they want. But he's definitely, I would like to see him go to a team that can dominate the ball, wants to play the fullbacks higher, because he can go to ground, can be a little bit rash at times. I know he only got 4 yellow cards in 21 league games, which is very impressive in Brazil. But sometimes those rash tackles in Europe, when the play's a little bit quicker, could potentially find him out. So to try and give that balanced argument, but one of the top left backs in Brazil, no surprise to see so many European teams after him. I'm very intrigued as to where he goes, but I think he needs to go into a side that dominates possession and wants to play with high press, get the players up and comfortable, using him in a way that he's comfortable to break through teams who want to sit 4-5 at the back. And I think that's where we'll see him sort of flourish. So really intrigued to see where he goes, but I think the general consensus from both of us, we like him, but he's young, he's raw, still needs a bit of time, potentially a loan move, but maybe not throwing him straight to a big club, because I know Spurs have been linked, which is, I think, the main link from what I've seen. But
Yes.
from one player who has not yet gone across to a big club to a really surprising move. I'm really interested to hear your thoughts on this now, because we're going to talk about Gremio's Alysson, 19 years of age, the winger, moved for around about 10 million euros, so around about 10 million pounds in this day and age, but 31 league games for Gremio last season, 1 goal, 2 assists, 5 Sudamericano appearances, 0 goals. Now, I know I said about Souza, you shouldn't read too much into the data as to what you can see. Maybe that applies here, but before I dive into my thoughts, now, were you surprised? Because this transfer happened very quickly, but are you surprised that Alisson's gone to such a high-profile side like Aston Villa, his first move to Europe? Or is it something that maybe I've missed and you expected?
No, I didn't expect it. I honestly didn't know him for a few months ago. If you asked me about him, I wouldn't know him. I didn't really watch Grêmio and everything. But then you start hearing about interest from other countries, other clubs, and you start, okay, let me go and see what this guy is about. And I feel like what's interesting for him, and maybe what attracted Unai to him is that he's very physical, but yet super technical. And it's not common for us to see winger profiles like that. He's very tall. He's usually the one that's going to hold up. We see usually center forwards doing that, holding up to the ball and doing the pivot and distributing. He's able to do that, even though he's a winger. And at times you're going to look at him and you're going to say, oh, he's a bit heavy. He's not going to get that ball. He's not going to run into space. And then he just shows you he's going to run into space. He's very, very good. I feel like I've watched a few clips and a few highlights and everything, and reading what other people, Grêmio fans, had to say, because that's how I feel like I got to know him better, especially because the season's now over and the move has already happened. But I feel like he has that profile that's so different, but yet so, you look at him and you want to see more of him. And I feel like, it may be a bit soon, maybe just because, everything happened so fast, even his league appearances, everything. The ascension to the first team was quite fast, but I feel like that's what Grêmio needed at the moment. So, well, there's not much we can do. But he's got great fundamentals and he's very physical, as I said, also very technical. He's got great speed and acceleration. He can carry the ball if needed. He can beat his markers if needed. He's also very disciplined when it comes to the tactical demands, which I feel like Villa are very important. He helps in defense. And I feel like in that 4-4-2 shape they have, I don't know if he's going to be a starter or anyway, but that doesn't really matter. But when they are defending on their 4-4-2, I can see him one of the wingers in that system, or sided midfielders, whatever you want to call it. But being able to hold his position and defend, but also being an outlet for maybe a fast counter. So it makes sense at first to think of the fit, although Villa are a big club and they are doing super well in the league right now. I don't know what's their plan for him, if he goes on loan or if he stays. I personally would like him to stay just so he can, figure out his new environment. But he's got fundamentals that I see happening and developing well under Unai and helping Villa whenever they can, because we know how the team is being set up, how the team is competitive for positions and everything. But I feel like this is a name also, again, for the future. He's not, I feel like, expecting him to be a starter and to having that, star status as we saw with maybe Estevão at some point. Even with Estevão, I always said, don't over expect.
We all said it.
Keep your feet on the ground. Yeah.
I
but
think
he's proving us wrong. It could happen again.
I think that Esteval's move and how good he's been, I know we've hyped him up and we were super excited. But we're not getting into Esteval here. I'm just using it as a comparison. But I think the fact that now when a Brazilian winger is going to move across to Europe, in particular the Premier League, expectations are going to go up higher and higher because of Esteval. I think I can safely put my head on the block here and say that Alysson is nowhere near the level of Esteval at all.
They couldn't be more different in terms of, they are technical, yes, but they're physical,
do you know who I
abilities,
compare
everything.
Him to? I
totally different.
I think he's very similar to Luis Guilherme in terms of the fact that when he gets the ball, knocks it into space and uses his power and pace to get there. Now, I have a list of positives for Alysson. We'll get to them, but I'm clearly going to start with a negative here because he has all the flicks and tricks and where he can take the ball away from, especially in a tight space, if the ball was played into him or if he's on a one-on-one situation, like he can flick the ball away from them or knock it in 10, 15 yards and burst into that space, which I agree with you. I see that as a positive. However, I question, will he get that much space if and when he plays in the Premier League? Will there be always that 10, 15 yards where he can knock the ball into and then think about his next move? That's where there probably needs to be some development or a loan needs to happen in order for Villa to work on that with him. And I think that's why his goal output in a poor Grêmio side, let's even for context for any Villa fans who are going to listen to this, the fact that like fans were abandoning even going to Gremio's stadium at the start of the season over ticket prices, and Gremio were falling down the league and not playing in front of anybody. And the reason why Alysson came in is because they were turning towards youth players because they couldn't really afford anyone at the time in terms of transfers, which is why he got his opportunity. But the fact then he's been playing in empty stadiums, in his goal contributions is 3 in 30, is a really low rate because the raw ability is there. You can see it, but it's the same as what I saw with Luis Guilherme. And I actually thought Luis Guilherme was better at the time before moving across to West Ham, where he's not been given an opportunity. So maybe that's where I'm a little bit hesitant, because Alysson has got a wonderful left foot, but he's very predictable. And then people can turn around to me and say, Iron Robin was very predictable, but it always worked for him. And I agree. But Alysson, it just seems to take too long sometimes inside the box, and then always shift it onto his left. And then by the time he's thought about it, the moment has gone. So
yeah, I was gonna say that.
Yeah.
I feel like he's got, he knows how to go to the byline, for example, but when he's actually needed, to make the decision to either cross or shoot, sometimes it does take a lot of time, and he misses that timing, that would be better for him to either cross or to shoot or to whatever, just hold on to the ball and maybe wait for other players to come. But I feel like he's under a manager that's going to demand a lot from him, but is also a great teacher, So yeah, time. This word is key, time.
Yeah, always. And I'm not here to knock him at all, because I think there is a lot of talent within him, but again, it seems to be quite a rushed transfer because he's only played 30 games in Brazil and for an average side, and not produced the numbers. Because I know I brought up Luis Guilherme for West Ham, but we could look at Gustavo Nunes, who moved across from Gremio and was the star there, and he's come to Brentford, and I know he's gone through a few injuries and he's not been able to play. But if you were to offer me Gustavo or Alysson fully fit, I'd lean towards Gustavo any day of the week. So I think even in a poor side, he was producing big numbers and like big performances before getting that move across to Brentford. Where with Alysson, could I highlight 2, 3, 4 matches over the season where I'm like, he dominated consistently over the match or walked away with the man of the match? Probably not. So it sounds like I'm being ultra negative. I'm not. I think I've said it a million times on the podcast. If Alysson stayed in Brazil for another 18 months, 24 months, you would get the player that you would want. But because everybody's trying to beat everybody to the next potential superstar, there's all these gambles on raw young players who may end up back in Brazil in the next year or two and be classed as a flop in the European game, which is obviously not true. But interesting to see two very different raw talents we've spoken about on the show. Obviously, Alyson's made that move, so Villa fans, there's a little bit more context for you, and potentially Spurs fans for Souza, although I know he's been linked with about 5 or 6 clubs. So it'll be interesting to see where he ends up, because it looks like a deal will be done in January. Now, I just want to highlight, we are back in 2026. We've been away for a while, but what is happening right now is the Copinha, which I'm sure people would have probably heard of because of the likes of Endrick and Esteval over the last couple of years. But this is an under-20 youth tournament happening throughout the month of January, where there's 100 plus teams at the start. All the way from Palmeiras down to semi-professional teams, even I haven't heard of before. It's a real mix of players, but this is a tournament which normally pulls out a few superstars every now and again. And it is free to watch on YouTube throughout the tournament. So if you do fancy yourself becoming a Brazilian scout or wanting to potentially find the next Esteval, tune into the Copinha on YouTube. But Nat's been watching a few games, so I've tasked her with bringing 1 or 2 players to the table, just a couple of minutes to keep an eye on, and potentially we've got some good clips in a year or 2 time when Nat has discovered the next big talent. But Nat, talk to me about the Copinha and who's caught your eye, because you've been to a couple of games, right?
No, I haven't this time.
Have you not? Oh, okay. Look, this is where YouTube comes in handy.
Yeah. because it's played in São Paulo. It's a tournament that São Paulo, which is a state here in Brazil,
Yeah,
they
forgive me. I thought you'd
organize
been.
it. No,
I thought
no,
you'd
no
been.
problem. I did watch some players who were playing the Copinha because I did watch a few games of the Carioca State Under-20 Championship last
Okay.
season, and some of those names are playing the Copinha right now. But the thing is about the Copinha, it's played in São Paulo. It's a very, very short tournament, especially because, there are a lot of games and a lot of teams. So it's very short because you have a lot of games in a short period of time. I guess it started on the 2nd and it ends on the 25th of January, which is the anniversary or birthday, whatever, of the city of Sao Paulo. So there's all that celebration and everything. And it kind of became a big thing nationally, especially because, as Nathan said, they give a platform for even semi-professional teams or teams who are actually not even teams professionally in terms of having a senior team. They only work with developing players and they play in the Copinha, and they usually platform those players for bigger clubs, and then those players have that opportunity as well to showcase themselves to clubs in Brazil, which is very important. And it usually kind of has this effect here after the Copinha, a few players from smaller, modest teams here in Brazil making moves to top teams who play in the Serie A. So there's that as well. The two players I'm going to mention here are players that are playing right now in the Copinha, and I did see them live, but not in the Copinha.
That's fine. It
I was
counts.
in the stadium
Yeah,
when I
yeah.
saw them, but for the Copinha games, I'm watching them on YouTube, as Nathan
Hmm.
said, it's free there, which are Lucas Zuccarello from Vasco and Wallace Davi from Fluminense. Wallace Davi is a funny one because he's being linked to a move to Botafogo, and I feel like it would be very, very stupid for Fluminense to, accept that.
Yeah.
Wallace is one of, maybe, I mean, if I had to describe him very quickly, he's a textbook defensive midfielder. He kind of, not going to say he's the same level, but he's got that Caicedo attitude where he goes to you know, every duel as if it's his last. But he's got a smoother way of moving because he's very tall. He's got long limbs, so he moves in a little smoother way. And yeah, he's the textbook defensive midfielder. He can engage in the build-up and help progress the ball. He's very physical and he knows how and in which situations to better use his body to shoot the ball and turn and stay in front of the play, in front of the pitch to see which decisions he can make and which one is the best one to make. And because he's very tall as well compared to most peers in his age groups, he's very good in the air as well. So there's all that. His fundamentals are very great for a defensive midfielder. He is a ball recovery machine. It's crazy, crazy, crazy. He just puts himself out there and gets that ball back and start attacks. And he can also, he knows how to control the tempo as well of the plays, which is very important for a defensive midfielder other than just defending. So I feel like that's a profile that not right now would suit players, maybe not players, but clubs in Europe, just because he hasn't had that, pro game time. He's played a few matches in the state championship last year, and I expect him to do the same this year as well. He did very well against professional sides, senior sides, as you call professional sides, as we call, but he did well against senior players who play in lower divisions in Brazil, mostly Serie D, Serie D, or Serie C, so it would be like the third and fourth divisions here. That's where players that he was facing, but he did well against them, which is always a good sign. And the fact that he's being linked to Botafogo as well, as I said, I feel like it would be stupid for Fluminense to let him go for another player, as much as that player is Savarino. But yeah, we're going to probably get into that in a while with more,
Hmm.
take a deep dive in that. But the thing is, he's a player that should be having more opportunities in the senior level, which is this year, this has to happen this year. because I feel like he's turning 20. So if it's not this year and if it's not in Fluminense, he's going to get it somewhere else. And he's someone that can help Fluminense as well, because Fluminense is a more experienced team in terms of, the age of the players and everything. So to have that breath of fresh, young player having game time is also great because it brings intensity as well. And the other one I mentioned, Zuccarello from Vasco, he's more of a, he kind of reminds me in terms of what he can bring to the senior team, because he's had opportunities there under Diniz already, but he just didn't click yet, and it's okay. He's now playing the Copinha, which is his age group. He's 19, so he can play there. But he kind of reminds me of Felipe Coutinho in terms of what he can bring. He's that offensive attacking midfielder. I see him more of this profile. I see him more like that, although Diniz has been deploying him more in the left wing. But I feel like it's, a consequence of him being young and having his first minutes in the senior team. They're going to put him in wider areas because any mistake will cause less problems there. But I feel like the progression is going to be for him to become this attacking midfielder, maybe a number 10, He operates much more inside than outside, and he's very technical. He tries sometimes, he's got okay decision making, but sometimes he, tends to feel like he can solve everything on his own because he's very good, and I feel like he acknowledges that he's very good. But if he tries to solve everything and do everything on his own in the senior level, he's going to get problems. So it's more about him, understanding that he needs to play for the team as well.
That's it. He's trying to get ahead of himself and impress.
Yeah.
Right?
And that comes with time, the maturity to understand that he's just one part of the team. I've been hearing about him for a while. I saw him play for Vasco under 20s when he was like 16, 17. So I've been keeping track of him for a while. And I feel like there's a lot there, but it's got to go with his mental game, because he's going to understand that he will need to take a few steps back and not be the star of the team as he's become when progressing through the academy. But he's a name to keep an eye on because he's got flair. He's got that Brazilian, style that everyone likes. And I feel like he could become a part of Vasco's senior team more regularly and have more minutes, and maybe make his mark just like Hayan did last season.
Okay, two top young talents to keep an eye on. I'll throw another one in the mix before we wrap up with our final section. Palmeiras' Riquelme Felipe has just been linked endlessly with European clubs without making more than a handful of minutes for the Palmeiras' first team. But I'm going to bring him up because he's been scoring relentlessly for the under-20s. He's now got an opportunity to impress in the Copinha. Zenit were one of the latest teams. Of course, they are. They're always got their eye on the Brazilian market, but European teams have been eyeing him up before, and hopefully we get to see him in the senior shirt for Palmeiras later this year, because I do really rate him. He's only 19 and a striker, right? We always talk about defenders on this particular podcast. So a 19-year-old striker from Palmeiras' academy to keep an eye on. Now we're going to close this podcast. We will be doing more as the season kicks off and throughout the year. So we'll analyze who we think is going to do well over the Brazilian season and have more predictions. But before we jumped onto the show, we had a discussion and we had to talk about Botafogo and their current situation, because what is happening behind the scenes is chaotic, even for Brazil. Now, we did a TikTok on it earlier in the week just to try and cover what actually is happening. But for context, for listeners who potentially missed that, Botafogo currently hasn't been lifted, a transfer ban spread over 3 windows, because the signing of Thiago Almada from Atalanta United, who's currently at Atletico Madrid, who apparently want to get rid of him in January. So he's on the move again already, potentially. John Textor, at the time for Botafogo, did not pay the outstanding $21 million fee for Almada. The deadline to get that done passed. So this is why Botafogo have been slapped with a transfer ban spread over 3 windows. They're in the process of shipping out quite a few big players, or big players are being offered to clubs. There's lots of rumours going around at the moment. Yet they're still trying to sign players. They've lined up Christian Medina from Estudiantes. We've spoke about Medina before on the podcast, maybe a couple of years ago now when he was at Boca. But what's really interesting about this deal is the fact that Medina is owned by Foster Gillett. Now, Liverpool fans will know all about him. He's not actually owned by a club. Foster Gillett bought Medina's rights and almost effectively gifted him to Estudiantes because he's got a relationship with the president, who's Juan Sebastian Veron, a real flashback for Man United fans there. But their relationship has allowed Estudiantes to bring in a couple of players last year. Medina therefore can potentially move to Botafogo if the transfer ban is lifted for nothing, and Estudiantes will get nothing because he's owned by Gillette. I don't think I've ever really heard of this before. It's so wild. Even when I say it out loud, I'm like, am I getting this right? But Botafogo have him lined up, and he's a top talent. But at the moment, they can't sign him. But they're clearly confident that they can get this transfer ban lifted. But in order to get this transfer ban lifted, lots of players are being linked away from the club. Jefferson Savarino is almost on his way to either Fluminense or Palmeiras. I think it's Flu at the moment.
Fluminense.
It's Fluminense?
Yeah.
Okay. The striker, ex-Benfica striker, Arthur Cabral, has been linked with Torino. Art has been linked with Marseille. Nat, what the hell is going on at Botafogo? Because even for Brazil, this is ridiculous. And look, the season starts in 3.5 weeks, and we have no idea what this squad is going to look like. Pay your bills is clearly the main message here. And if we go back to the start of the show when you said Flamengo have got everything sorted in-house, it just goes to show how important that is, because this is now chaotic at Botafogo, isn't it?
Yeah, total chaos. It's one of the SAFs that I said earlier that have the money, or probably don't right now because they're not paying the transfers they should be paying, but that thought money would resolve all their problems, and it's just not true. And the funny thing about Botafogo is they announced 3 new players for the season, but they can't register them because of the ban. So they keep signing players, but they can't register them. Almost like what, or probably the same thing that happened to Barcelona a couple of years ago, that they had to register, and that same mess. That's how Botafogo are, and there's a complete seizure between the board and the club, the association that we call it here, which would be like Clube Associativo, which is the club ran by fans and other people, and the SAF, which controls football, which is John Textor. And there's a whole thing in the SAF as well, in the footballing department, with John Textor and his ex group and everything, his former group, his former, owners of Botafogo. So it's a complete mess, and it's crazy to think that less than 2 years ago they were winning the Brasileirão and the Libertadores. So that's how quick things change in football, especially in Brazil. It just feels like things here happen quicker than elsewhere.
Yeah.
I don't know why.
Yeah.
I feel like it's because it's pure chaos. But you see, they went from hell to heaven from 2023 to 2024, then went straight back to hell again. And I just don't see them leaving at the moment because it's all a mess. To make things worse, they are trying to sell, or I don't even know if it's sell, or let's just call it offload some more experienced players to direct rivals. I've heard links of Barbosa, which is their probably main defender at the moment, and it's been like that since he arrived in 2023. But he could be off to Fluminense, just like Savarino could be off to Fluminense. Those are not only clubs that are in similar positions mostly in the league, but those are clubs that have a direct rivalry here in Rio. It's not the strongest, but it's still a rivalry.
Yeah.
So it kind of makes no sense to me to be able to do that. But the thing is, I don't know if they're going to be able to register players because of the ban, but they just keep signing players, and there are talks of rumors of them being linked to other players. And the trend I'm seeing is Botafogo going for younger players. Maybe they are trying to get this squad shake-up, for Anselmi to work with. But the thing is, they can sign whoever they want. They just won't be able to register them. And I don't feel like any players would be willing to, be signed by a club and just not play, especially those young players who need to play to build a platform and to showcase themselves for, other clubs outside of Brazil, which ultimately is where they want to go, or just, win more at Botafogo in terms of salaries and titles as well. So I just don't see them, changing right now. I guess there was a deadline the club gave fans when they got the ban. They wrote a note and said that they were going to try to solve it. And I feel like it was towards the middle of January.
Yeah.
I don't quite remember the actual date, but we're on the 7th already. So time's ticking.
They're clearly confident that they can get this ban lifted, and as you said, things move quick in Brazil. But I think if we just summarize this with the fact, as you said, 2 years ago, league champions, Libertadores champions, had a squad that was really there to worry Flamengo and Palmeiras long term. They could have really built on that squad, but John Textor clearly brought players in to sell them. And does he have the club's interest at heart when he was going through this process? I think
I feel like he didn't. But the thing is, the worst thing for me is that he's selling for a value that's way lower than those players actually, value.
Yeah.
The Thiago Amaro sale was crazy. Luis Henrique as well. I don't know if he wanted to go to Zenit, if he did, crazy. But lucky for him, he's still being watched by Ancelotti. He made a mark, so he's probably going to keep getting his call-ups, but it was a big, big risk. Thiago Amaro sale, crazy. Players he sold to Forest. I know you're a Forest fan, and you probably liked it because the value was way less than you would have, spent if it was an actual sale, competitive sale, let's put it this way. But that's the point, you can try. Probably that's the direction he's going with the names I'm seeing being linked with Botafogo, younger players that can be sold for profit in the future, which is okay. But he's not even selling for profit, which is the craziest part for me. So that's why I feel like it's only going to get worse if he doesn't figure it out. And just another thing that I wanted to mention, Marlon Freitas went to Palmeiras. Marlon Freitas, who was their captain. So it's all crumbling down on the pitch, off the pitch. And I feel like Anselmi is going to start his job in a very difficult position. And it's crazy, as we already mentioned, to think that 2 years ago, we thought they would be, one of the next forces in Brazil, maybe have a top 4 with Cruzeiro, Palmeiras, and Flamengo.
Absolutely.
It just seems distant right now.
Yeah, it is crazy. And look, any developments, we'll be speaking about it or writing about it. So do, again, subscribe to our Substack or the podcast across your preferred platform. We will be back to discuss the Brazilian season, more transfers, predictions throughout January. So this was just a warm-up act, so to speak. Diving back into the podcast after a well-deserved break, but with Brazil being as crazy as ever and the rumours happening, we'll be here to talk about them. So thank you again for joining us. Happy New Year. The Copper Club is back, so subscribe, rate the show. We really appreciate it, and we'll see you all very soon.